They say a wedding reveals more than love. It reveals true character. In today's story, a glamorous bride, with everything money could buy, meets a moment she'll never forget. Her lifelong friend, the maid of honor, arrived in a simple dress, carrying more heart than luxury. But what happened next shocked everyone. Within seconds, pride clashed with humility, and a single man's words changed the entire wedding. Stay with me till the end, because this story will show you that class isn't worn, it's shown. And sometimes, the richest heart belongs to the humblest soul. Before we talk about the moment that changed everything, let's step into the celebration itself. The wedding hall shimmered under golden lights. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and every table was dressed in white silk. The air was thick with perfume, laughter, and the sound of cameras clicking. It was the kind of wedding people dream about, where nothing seems out of place. Every corner screamed perfection. The bride stood at the center of it all, glowing in her designer gown. Her dress was custom-made, with pearls that caught the light every time she moved. Her hair was styled perfectly, not a single strand out of place. She carried herself like a queen, and honestly, everyone saw her that way. She was beautiful, rich, and confident. Someone who had everything under control. Then came the maid of honor, her best friend from childhood, the one who'd been by her side through everything. Her name was Lily. She wasn't dressed in luxury, but she wore a kind smile that warmed the room. Her dress was simple, a soft pastel color that didn't shine like the bride's gown, yet it suited her perfectly. She didn't care much for glamour. She believed moments were more important than appearances. As the photographers called for pictures, the bride waved her hand, motioning Lily to come closer. "Come on, stand next to me," she said, smiling just enough for the cameras. Lily rushed over, holding her bouquet carefully, trying not to trip on the expensive carpet. She adjusted her posture and smiled shyly beside her friend. But then, the moment froze. The bride glanced at Lily's dress, her eyes scanning from the simple neckline to the plain shoes. The smile faded. She leaned in slightly and whispered, though not quietly enough, "Couldn't you have found something a little more dot 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 appropriate? This is my wedding, not a charity event." For a second, the laughter and chatter in the room seemed to stop. The photographer hesitated. A few guests turned their heads. Lily blinked, unsure if she heard it right. Her cheeks turned red, and her smile trembled. She tried to laugh it off, mumbling, "Oh, I didn't want to outshine you," hoping to keep things light. But the bride just rolled her eyes. "Trust me, that wouldn't happen," she said with a smirk. The photographer quickly resumed his work, trying to distract everyone, but the damage was done. The insult lingered in the air, sharp and cutting. As the reception continued, Lily did her best to blend into the crowd. She smiled when spoken to, poured drinks for others, and helped the guests find their seats. But inside, her heart sank. She'd known her friend for years, through school, through struggles, and never imagined she'd speak to her like that. Meanwhile, the bride laughed loudly at her table, surrounded by friends from her new social circle. They complimented her dress, her jewelry, her grand entrance. Every few minutes, she tossed a glance toward Lily, who stood quietly in the corner, avoiding eye contact. Whispers began to spread. Some guests leaned in close, saying things like, "Is that her maid of honor? She doesn't look the part." Others just watched, sensing the tension. The sparkle of the night started to dull for those who noticed the exchange. Before we talk about the next twist, let's look at one man in the crowd. The bride's father. It was a tall, composed gentleman, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp. He'd noticed the moment between his daughter and Lily. He saw how Lily's face changed after the comment. He saw how the crowd reacted, and though he didn't speak, you could tell he was thinking deeply. He raised his glass, but didn't drink. Instead, he watched the bride from across the room. He'd worked hard his whole life to give her this kind of life. Comfort, security, success. But in that brief exchange, Something in his daughter reminded him of what wealth can sometimes do, make people forget where they came from. As the evening went on, the bride's laughter grew louder, almost forced, as if she wanted to cover the earlier tension. Guests danced, the band played soft jazz, and waiters moved between tables carrying trays of champagne. But beneath the surface, a quiet unease settled in. Lily stood near the edge of the dance floor, her hands clasped together. She kept smiling whenever someone looked her way, but her eyes were distant. The music, the lights, the luxury, none of it felt the same anymore. She remembered the days when she and the bride used to sit under a tree behind their school, sharing lunch because Lily couldn't afford her own. The bride used to tell her that money never mattered, that friendship was worth more than anything. But looking at her now, surrounded by wealth and applause, Lily wondered if that girl still existed. Meanwhile, the father moved closer to the front, pretending to mingle. He greeted guests, nodded politely, but his focus never left his daughter and her maid of honor. Every now and then, his eyes softened when he looked at Lily, perhaps remembering the time she helped his daughter study, the day she stayed late to help around the house. Before we talk about what he did next, imagine standing in his place, a father watching his daughter lose sight of humility right in front of everyone. He didn't want to embarrass her, but he couldn't ignore it either. He believed in values, not appearances. The bride, still unaware of the growing tension, began her toast. Her voice filled the hall, confident and bright. She thanked her husband, her guests, her family, but didn't mention Lily. Not once. Lily clapped politely, though her heart sank a little lower with every word. The father's hand tightened around his glass. He leaned slightly toward the groom's side of the table, his jaw firm. It was Whiting waiting for the right moment. Around the hall, small things started to show the mood shift. The guests who'd laughed earlier now spoke quietly. A few cast glances at Lily, their expressions guilty, maybe even sympathetic. The music faded slightly as the toast ended, and applause followed, but it wasn't as loud as before. Lily excused herself, stepping aside to fix the decorations near the cake table. She wasn't crying, but her eyes glistened under the soft lights. She told herself to be strong, to focus on her friend's happiness, even if her own heart was breaking. The father's gaze followed her, and that's when it happened, the moment before everything changed. He slowly stood up from his chair, straightened his jacket, and cleared his throat. The sound was small, but in that hushed hall, it carried far. Conversation stopped. The bride turned, a confused smile on her face. And just like that, the night took a turn no one expected. Before we talk about the moment that silenced the entire hall, let's remember where we left off. The bride was about to begin her toast, smiling, confident, holding the microphone as if the whole night revolved around her. The crowd waited, glasses ready for a cheer. Everything seemed perfect again on the surface, but beneath the golden lights, tension still lingered like a quiet echo. The maid of honor, Lily, stood a few steps behind, her eyes lowered, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the hem of her dress. The hurt still stung, but she tried to keep her composure. She didn't want to ruin her friend's big day. She told herself to stay invisible, just get through the night and disappear quietly afterward. But life has a way of revealing truth when pride hides it. As the bride lifted her glass to speak, her father slowly pushed back his chair. The sound of the legs scraping the marble floor drew a few glances, but when people realized who it was, the room fell silent. The bride paused, mid-sentence, looking confused. Her father never interrupted public moments. Never. He stood tall, his expression calm but heavy. He didn't look angry, just deeply disappointed. His suit looked crisp under the warm light, but his presence carried something stronger than luxury authority. "Before you continue, sweetheart," he said, his voice deep and clear, echoing across the hall. "There's something I'd like to say." The bride blinked, forcing a smile. "Dad, can we?" He raised a hand gently, and the words caught in her throat. The guests turned their chairs slightly toward him, curious, unsure of what was about to happen. Even the band stopped playing. You could almost hear the flicker of candles. He looked around the room, then back at his daughter. "I've been proud of many things in my life," he began. "My work, my family, and most of all, the values I've tried to live by. I always believed that success means nothing if you lose kindness along the way. The bride's smile faded. Her fingers tightened around the microphone. Her father continued, his tone still calm. Tonight, I saw something that made me stop and think. Maybe we've all forgotten a little about what truly matters. Maybe we've let appearances speak louder than actions. Every guest sat still. No one dared whisper. He turned his gaze toward Lily. I've known this young woman for years. She was there when my daughter had nothing but dreams. She stayed by her side when the rest of the world walked away. She has shared laughter, tears, and sacrifices most people here would never imagine. Lily froze. Her eyes widened slightly, not knowing what to do. The bride glanced at her too, then quickly looked down, guilt washing over her face. The father continued, his words steady but sharp as truth. And tonight, she stands here, not dressed in jewels or silk, but with the same heart she's always had. A heart that values friendship over fashion, character over wealth. The air in the hall thickened. Guests exchanged uneasy looks. Some lowered their eyes. He took a slow breath and shifted his gaze back to his daughter. When you were a little girl, you once gave your lunch to Lily because she forgot hers. You told me, Dad. She's my best friend. I can't eat if she can't. Do you remember that, dear? The bride's lips parted, but no words came out. She did remember. The schoolyard, the shared sandwich, the laughter, but standing there in her shimmering gown, surrounded by luxury, that memory felt miles away. Her father took a few steps forward. I raised you to believe that kindness makes a person rich. Not diamonds, not status, not applause, kindness. But tonight, I saw something in you that didn't belong to the daughter I know. A soft gasp moved through the guests. The bride's face turned pale. Her eyes glistened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calmness made every word hit harder. A person can have all the money in the world, but without humility, they have nothing worth keeping. The silence stretched long and heavy. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim. He turned again to the guests. We live in a world that praises what shines, but forgets what truly glows the heart. And this young woman, he gestured gently toward Lily, has a heart that glows brighter than any diamond in this room. Lily swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hide. She wasn't used to attention, especially not this kind. Before we talk about what the bride did next, notice how the mood of the hall had shifted. Just minutes ago, laughter filled the air, music danced through the walls, and pride sparkled in every corner. But now, a quiet truth had taken over. Even the guests who barely knew Lily could feel it's something pure, something real. The bride lowered the microphone slowly. Her lips trembled as she tried to find words, but her throat felt tight. She looked at her father, the man who taught her everything, and then at Lily, who stood small and still near the corner, her hands clasped in front of her. Her father's eyes softened. He didn't want to embarrass her. He wanted to remind her. "Child," he said quietly, his voice breaking slightly, "I gave you everything I could. But if I ever failed to teach you that respect matters more than riches, then all this," he waved his hand around the decorated hall, "means nothing." A soft murmur rippled through the guests. Some nodded, some dabbed at their eyes. The bride felt her chest tighten. For the first time that night, the spotlight felt heavy, almost painful. Her reflection in the crystal glasses looked unfamiliar, someone she didn't recognize. The silence stretched, and then something subtle shifted in her eyes. Guilt turned to realization. Realization turned to regret. She looked at Lily again, and in that moment, all the childhood memories came flooding back. The sleepovers, the shared secrets, the laughter when they had nothing but each other. Lily stood frozen, unsure whether to smile or cry. Before we talk about the next moment, imagine standing in that room, a hall that once sparkled with wealth, now glowing with something deeper. Truth. Every guest could feel it. Even the music, when it resumed faintly in the background. Say Maid, softer, almost respectful. The bride's hand trembled as she set the microphone down. She didn't speak. She just walked slowly toward Lily. Her gown shimmered with every step. Betty's time. It wasn't the dress people noticed. It was the silence, thick with emotion. The father watched quietly, his expression unreadable but his heart relieved. He had done what needed to be done, not to humiliate, but to awaken. The bride stopped in front of Lily, her eyes full of tears, her lips parting slightly as if to say something. But before the words could come, the father's voice echoed once more, softer this time. "True beauty," he said, "is not in how you look when the world watches, but in how you treat those who would stand by you even if no one else does." The crowd remained silent. No one clapped. No one whispered. They just watched as the night, once painted in gold, turned into something real. And then everything changed. Before we talk about the moment that softened every heart in that room, let's stay with the silence that followed the father's words. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt empty. It was heavy, full of thought, full of realization, the kind that forces everyone to look inward, to ask themselves what they would have done. The bride stood still, her breath shallow. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, the kind she tried to hide behind her mascara. Her perfectly curled hair, her flawless makeup, her sparkling jewelry, none of it mattered anymore. For the first time that night, she felt small, not because someone had shamed her, but because the truth had stripped away her pride. Lily, on the other hand, stood like a reflection of calm. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her expression was gentle but distant, as if she didn't quite believe what was happening. The pain from earlier still sat in her chest, but now it was mixed with confusion. Was this really the same friend who'd laughed at her hours ago? The guests watched in silence. Some held their hands near their mouths, waiting for something. An apology, a word, a gesture. Even the waiters froze in place, unsure whether to keep serving. The air itself seemed to pause. Before we talk about what happened next, it's important to understand what was going through the bride's mind. Every memory she had with Lily came flooding back. The sleepovers in tiny bedrooms, sharing snacks after school, laughing over silly jokes. The days when money didn't matter, when kindness was enough. She realized that somewhere along the path to a perfect life, she'd lost sight of the very thing that made her human. Her father's eyes stayed on her steady, patient, but firm. He didn't need to speak again. His silence was enough. It carried both disappointment and hope. The bride took a deep breath. Her hand trembled as she reached for the hem of her gown, lifting it slightly so she could walk. Each step echoed faintly against the marble floor, the sound cutting through the quiet hall. The crowd parted slowly, making room for her without a word. Lily blinked, unsure if she should step back or stay still. The bride stopped just in front of her. For a moment, neither said anything. The lights shimmered softly across the glass chandeliers, creating tiny reflections that danced across their faces. Then, with eyes filled with guilt and emotion, the bride extended her hand. No words, no speech, just a hand, trembling slightly, but reaching out with sincerity. Lily looked at it, unsure what to do. Part of her wanted to turn away, still wounded from the humiliation, but the other part, the kind-hearted part, that had always loved her friend despite everything, couldn't ignore what that gesture meant. She slowly took the bride's hand. Her touch was gentle, forgiving. The kind of touch that says, "I remember who you were, and I still believe in you." The crowd exhaled collectively, as if they'd been holding their breath. A few people began to clap softly. Then the sound grew hesitant at first, tense Trunger until the hall filled with applause. The father closed his eyes for a moment, relief washing over his face. He wasn't smiling widely, but there was peace in his expression. He'd done what a father must, reminded his child of the values she'd forgotten, and then stepped back to let her find her own way. The groom, standing nearby, moved closer. He placed a hand gently on the bride's shoulder, his face kind but thoughtful. He didn't say much, just nodded. As if to say, "This is the woman I fell in love with, not the one who forgot her heart." Before we talk about how the rest of the night unfolded, notice what was happening in that moment between the two women. The bride, once shining in pride, now looked fragile but real. The maid of honor, who had started the night feeling small, now stood tall without even trying. Lily smiled faintly, a small but genuine smile that came from forgiveness, not victory. She didn't need to prove anything. She'd always known who she was. And somehow, that quiet strength shone brighter than all the chandeliers above. The bride took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft applause. "I forgot who I was, and who you've always been to me." Lily's eyes softened. She gave a small nod and whispered back, "It's okay. We all forget sometimes." It wasn't a dramatic apology, no tears, no long speeches, but it was real. And realness has a way of touching hearts more deeply than grand gestures ever could. The father watched them, his eyes glistening slightly. He gave a small nod, almost to himself, and then raised his glass in quiet acknowledgement. The guests followed, their clinking glasses filling the hall with a soft, harmonious sound, a sound of closure, of understanding, of quiet joy. Before we talk about the subtle shift that followed, let's take in the image that defined that evening. Two women standing side by side, one in diamonds, one in simplicity, holding hands under the soft golden light. One had rediscovered her heart, the other had never lost hers. The bride gently guided Lily to the main table, making space beside her. Guests moved aside as they walked together, whispers fading into smiles. For the first time all night, the bride's laughter sounded genuine, lighter, warmer. The groom leaned in, whispering something softly into her ear that made her smile wider. The father's eyes softened even more, and he turned to the crowd. Without saying a word, he gave a meaningful glance, one that said, "This is what I wanted you all to see." The band began to play again, a slow, heartfelt tune that filled the air with warmth. People started to dance, couples swaying gently. The earlier tension completely melted away. But at the center of it all, two friends stood together, holding hands, both changed in different ways. Lily didn't crave attention. She was happy just to be there, to see her friend return to herself. The bride, meanwhile, realized that all the gold and glitter around her meant nothing without the people who truly cared. Every so often, their eyes met, and they shared small smiles that said everything words couldn't. The father watched quietly from his seat, his expression thoughtful but calm. He knew his words had done their job, not by forcing guilt, but by awakening conscience. Elianad Buck taking a slow sip of his drink, letting the moment breathe. Before we talk about how the night came to a close, picture this. The camera would slowly pan across the room. Guests laughing again, music filling the space, and in the center, two women whose bond had survived pride, pain, and realization. The bride squeezed Lily's hand gently and whispered something that only the two of them could hear. Lily smiled, nodded, and together, they turned toward the crowd as if to face the world again. Not as a rich bride and a poor maid of honor, but as to hearts that had finally found each other again in truth. And from across the hall, the father watched, silent and proud, knowing that some lessons aren't taught in words. They're learned through the courage to admit you are wrong and the grace to forgive. In the end, the bride learned a truth no amount of wealth could buy. That respect opens more hearts than money ever will. She realized a true friend is worth more than 1,000 glittering jewels, and humility is the finest accessory anyone can wear. Life may test our character in quiet moments, but how we treat others always tells our real story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give this video a like, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one.